This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Sky Island by L. Frank Baum. Chapter 26. Trot Celebrates Her Victory. The Blue people were by this time dazed with wonder at all the events that had transpired that eventful day, but they still had wit enough to be glad the war was over, for in war someone is likely to get hurt, and it is foolish to take such chances when one can remain quietly at home. The Blues did not especially admire the Pinkies, but it was easier to entertain them than to fight them, and above all the Blueskins were greatly rejoiced that their wicked Bularoo had been conquered and could no longer abuse them. So they were quite willing to obey the orders of their girl Queen, and in a short time the blasts of trumpets and roll of drums and clashing of cymbals told Trot and Cap'n Bill that the blue bands had assembled before the palace. So they went down and found that a great crowd of people had gathered, and these cheered Trot with much enthusiasm, which was very different from the scowls and surly looks with which they had formerly greeted their strange visitors from the earth. The soldiers wore their best blue uniforms and were formed before the palace in marching order. So Trot and Cap'n Bill headed the procession, and then came the soldiers, all keeping step, and then the bands, playing very loud noises on their instruments, and finally the crowd of blue citizens, waving flags and banners and shouting joyfully. In this order they proceeded to the main gate, which Trot ordered the guards to throw wide open. Then they all marched out a little way into the fields and found that the army of Pinkies had already formed and was advancing steadily toward them. At the head of the Pinkies were Ghip Ghisizzle and Button Bright, who had the parrot on his shoulder, and they were supported by Captain Coralie and Captain Tintint and Rosalie the Witch. They had decided to capture the Blue City at all hazards, that they might rescue Trot and Cap'n Bill and conquer the Bolaroo. So when from a distance they saw the Blueskins march from the gate with banners flying and bands playing, they supposed a most terrible fight was about to take place. However, as the two forces came nearer together, Button Bright spied Trot and Cap'n Bill standing before the enemy, and the sight astonished him considerably. "Welcome, friends!" shouted Cap'n Bill in a loud voice. And "Welcome!" cried Trot. And "Welcome!" roared the blue soldiers and the people of the Blue City. "Hooray!" yelled the parrot. "Welcome to our happy home, from which no longer we will roam." And then he flapped his wings and barked like a dog with pure delight, and added as fast as his bird's tongue could speak: "One army's pink and one is blue, but neither one is in a stew, because the naughty Boolaroo is out of sight. So what we'll do is try to be a jolly crew, and dance and sing our tooraloo, and to our friends be ever true, and to our foes—" "Stop it!" said Button Bright. "I can't hear myself think." The Pinkies were amazed at the strange reception of the Blues, and hesitated to advance. But Trot now ran up in front of them and made a little speech. "Pinkies," she said, "your queen has conquered the Bolaroo and is now the Queen of the Blues. All of Sky Island except the Fog Bank is now my kingdom, so I welcome my faithful Pinkies to my Blue City, where you are to be royally entertained and have a good time. The war is over, and everybody must be sociable and happy, or I'll know the reason why." Now, indeed, the Pinkies raised a great shout of joy, and the Blues responded with another joyful shout, and Rosalie kissed the little girl and said she had performed wonders, and everybody shook hands with Cap'n Bill and congratulated him upon his escape. And the parrot flew to Trot's shoulder and screeched: "The Pinkies are pink, the Blues are blue, but Trot's the queen, so tooraloo!" When the Blueskins saw Ghip Ghisizzle they raised another great shout, for he was the favorite of the soldiers and very popular with all the people. But Ghip Ghisizzle did not heed the shouting. He was looking downcast and sad, and it was easy to see he was disappointed because he had not conquered the Bolaroo himself. But the people called upon him for a speech, so he faced the Blueskins and said: "I escaped from the city because the Bolaroo tried to patch me, as you all know, and the 6 snub-nosed princesses tried to marry me, which would have been a far greater misfortune. But I have recovered the Book of Royal Records, which has long been hidden in the treasure chamber, and by reading it I find that the Boolooroo is not your lawful Boolooroo at all, having reigned more than his 300 years. Since last Thursday I, Ghip Ghisizzle, have been the lawful Boolooroo of the Blue Country, but now that you are conquered by Queen Trot, I suppose I am conquered too, and you have no Boolooroo at all." "Hooray!" cried the parrot. "Here's a pretty howdy do! You haven't any Boolooroo!" Trot had listened carefully to the Majordomo's speech. When he finished she said cheerfully: "Don't worry, Sizzle dear. It'll all come right pretty soon. Now then, let's enter the city and enjoy the grand feast that's being cooked. I'm nearly starved myself, for this conquerin' kingdoms is hard work." So the Pinkies and the Blues marched side by side into the city, and there was great rejoicing and music and dancing and feasting and games and merrymaking that lasted for 3 full days. Trot carried Rosalie and Captain Coralie and Ghip Ghisizzle to the palace, and of course Button Bright and Cap'n Bill were with her. They had the royal chef serve dinner at once, and they ate it in great state, seated in the royal banquet hall, where they were waited on by 100 servants. The parrot perched upon the back of Queen Trot's chair, and the girl fed it herself, being glad to have the jolly bird with her again. After they had eaten all they could and the servants had been sent away, Trot related her adventures, telling how, with the assistance of the billy goat, she had turned the tables on the wicked Boolooroo. Then she gave Rosalie back her magic ring, thanking the kind witch for all she had done for them. "And now," said she, "I want to say to Ghip-Sizzle that just as soon as we can find Button Bright's umbrel we're going to fly home again. I'll always be Queen of Sky Island, but the Pink and Blue countries must each have a ruler. I think I'll make Sizzle the Boolooroo of the Blues, but I want you to promise me, Ghip, that you'll destroy the great knife and its frame and clean up the room and turn it into a skating rink, and never patch anyone as long as you rule the Blueskins." Ghip Ghisizzle was overjoyed at the prospect of being Boolooroo of the Blues, but he looked solemn at the promise Trot exacted. "I'm not cruel," he said, "and I don't approve of patching in general, so I'll willingly destroy the great knife. But before I do that I want the privilege of patching the Snubnosed Princesses to each other, mixing the 6 as much as possible, and then I want to patch the former Boolooroo to the billy goat, which is the same punishment he was going to inflict upon Cap'n Bill." "No," said Trot positively. "There's been enough patching in this country, and I won't have any more of it. The old Boolooroo and the 6 stuck-up princesses will be punished enough by being put out of the palace. The people don't like 'em a bit, so they'll be outcasts and wanderers, and that will make 'em sorry they were so wicked and cruel when they were powerful. Am I right, Cap'n Bill?" "You are, mate," replied the sailor. "Please, Queen Trot," begged Ghip Ghisizzle, "let me patch just the Boolooroo. It will be such a satisfaction." "I have said no, and I mean it," answered the girl. "You let the poor old Boolooroo alone. There's nothing that hurts so much as a come down in life, and I 'spect the old rascal's goin' to be pretty miserable by and by." "What does he say to his reverse of fortune?" asked Rosalie. "Why, I don't believe he knows about it," said Trot. "Guess I'd better send for him and tell him what has happened." So the Captain of the Guards was given the key and told to fetch the Boolooroo from the room of the Great Knife. The guards had a terrible struggle with the goat, which was loose in the room and still wanted to fight, but finally they subdued the animal, and then they took the Boolooroo out of the frame he was tied in and brought both him and the goat before Queen Trot, who awaited them in the throne room of the palace. When the courtiers and the people assembled saw the goat they gave a great cheer, for the beast had helped to dethrone their wicked ruler. "What's goin' to happen to this tough old warrior, Trot?" asked Cap'n Bill. "It's my idee as he's braver than the whole blue army put together." "You're right, Cap'n," she returned. "I'll have Sizzle make a fine yard for the goat, where he'll have plenty of blue grass to eat, and I'll have a pretty fence put around it and make all the people honor and respect him just as long as he lives." "I'll gladly do that," promised the new Boolooroo, "and I'll feed the honorable goat all the shavings and leather and tin cans he can eat besides the grass. He'll be the happiest goat in Sky Island, I assure you." As they led the now famous animal from the room, the Boolooroo shuddered and said, "How dare you people give orders in my palace? I'm the Boolooroo." "'Scuse me," said Trot. I neglected to tell you that you're not the Boolooroo any more. We've got the Royal Record Book, and it proves you've already ruled this country longer than you had any right to. 'Sides all that, I'm the Queen o' Sky Island, which means Queen o' the Pinkies and Queen o' the Blues, both of 'em. So things are run as I say, and I've made Ghip Ghisizzle Boolooroo in your place. He'll look after this end of the island hereafter, and unless I'm much mistaken, he'll do a heap better than you did." The former Boolooroo groaned. "What's going to become of me, then?" he asked. "Am I to be patched, or what?" "You won't be hurt," answered the girl, "but you'll have to find some other place to stay besides this palace, and perhaps you'll enjoy workin' for a living, by way of variety." "Can't I take any of the treasure with me?" he pleaded. "Not even a bird cage," she said. "Ever'thing in the palace now belongs to Ghip Ghisizzle." "Except the 6 snub-nosed princesses!" exclaimed the new Boolooroo, earnestly. "Won't you please get rid of them, too, your Majesty? Can't they be discharged?" "Of course," said Trot. "They must go with their dear father and mother. Isn't there some house in the city they can all live in, Ghip?" "Why, I own a little cabin at the end of the town," said Ghip Ghisizzle, "and I'll let them use that, as I won't need it any longer. It isn't a very pretty cabin, and the furniture is cheap and common, but I'm sure it is good enough for this wicked man and his family." "I'll not be wicked any more," sighed the old Boolooroo. "I'll reform. It's always best to reform when it is no longer safe to remain wicked. As a private citizen I shall be a model of deportment, because it would be dangerous to be otherwise." Trot now sent for the princesses, who had been weeping and wailing and fighting among themselves ever since they learned that their father had been conquered. When first they entered the throne room they tried to be as haughty and scornful as ever, but the Blues who were assembled there all laughed at them and jeered them, for there was not a single person in all the Blue Country who loved the princesses the least little bit. Trot told the girls that they must go with their father to live in Ghip Ghisizzle's little old cabin, and when they heard this dreadful decree the 6 snub-nosed ones began to scream and have hysterics, and between them they managed to make so much noise that no one could hear anything else. So Ghip Ghisizzle ordered the captain to take a file of soldiers and escort the raving beauties to their new home. This was done, the once royal family departing from the palace with shamed and downcast looks. Then the room of the Great Knife was cleared of its awful furniture. The frames were split into small pieces of blue wood, and the benches chopped into kindling, and the immense sharp knife broken into bits. All the rubbish was piled in the square before the palace and a bonfire made of it, while the blue people clustered around and danced and sang with joy as the blue flames devoured the dreadful instrument that had once caused them so much unhappiness. That evening Trot gave a grand ball in the palace, to which the most important of the Pinkies and the Blueskins were invited. The combined bands of both the countries played the music, and a fine supper was served. The Pinkies would not dance with the Blues, however, nor would the Blues dance with the Pinkies. The two nations were so different in all ways that they were unable to agree at all, and several times during the evening quarrels arose, and there was fighting between them which Trot promptly checked. "I think it will be best for us to go back to our own country as soon as possible," suggested Rosalie the Witch, "for if we stay here very long the Blueskins may rise against us and cause the Pinkies much trouble." "Just as soon as we find that umbrel," promised Trot, "we'll dive into the Fog Bank and make tracks for the land of sunrise and sunset." End of chapter 26. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Sky Island by L. Frank Baum. Chapter 27. The Fate of the Magic Umbrella. Next morning the search for the Magic Umbrella began in earnest. With many to hunt for it and the liberty of the whole palace to aid them, every inch of the great building was carefully examined. But no trace of the umbrella could be found. Cap'n Bill and Button Bright went down to the cabin of the former Boolaroo and tried to find out what he had done with the umbrella, but the old Boolaroo said, "I had it brought from the treasure chamber and tried to make it work, but there was no magic about the thing, so I threw it away. I haven't any idea what became of it." The six former princesses were sitting upon a rude bench, looking quite bedraggled and untidy. Said Indigo, "If you will make Ghip Ghisizzle marry me, I'll find your old umbrella." "Where is it?" asked Button Bright eagerly. "Make Ghip Ghisizzle marry me and I'll tell you," repeated Indigo. "But I won't say another word about it until after I am married." So they went back to the palace and proposed to the new Boolooroo to marry Indigo, so they could get their Magic Umbrella. But Ghip Ghisizzle positively refused. "I'd like to help you," said he, "but nothing will ever induce me to marry one of those snubnoses." "They're very pretty for Blueskins," said Trot. "But when you marry a girl you marry the inside as well as the outside," declared Ghip Ghisizzle. "And inside these princesses there are wicked hearts and evil thoughts. I'd rather be patched than marry the best of them." "Which is the best?" asked Button Bright. "I don't know, I'm sure," was the reply. "Judging from their actions in the past, there is no best." Rosalie the Witch now went to the cabin and put Indigo into a deep sleep by means of a powerful charm. Then, while the princess slept, the witch made her tell all she knew, which wasn't a great deal, to be sure, but it was soon discovered that Indigo had been deceiving them and knew nothing at all about the umbrella. She had hoped to marry Ghip Ghisizzle and become queen, after which she could afford to laugh at their reproaches. So the witch woke her up and went back to the palace to tell Trot of her failure. The girl and Button Bright and Cap'n Bill were all rather discouraged by this time, for they had searched high and low and had not found a trace of the all important umbrella. That night none of them slept much, for they all lay awake wondering how they could ever return to the earth and to their homes. In the morning of the third day after Trot's conquest of the Blues, the little girl conceived another idea. She called all the servants of the palace to her and questioned them closely, but not one could remember having seen anything that looked like an umbrella. "Are all the servants of the old Boolooroo here?" inquired Cap'n Bill, who was sorry to see Trot looking so sad and downcast. "All but one," was the reply. "Tiggle used to be a servant, but he escaped and ran away." "Oh, yes!" exclaimed Trot. "Tiggle is in hiding somewhere. Perhaps he don't know there's been a revolution and a new Boolooroo rules the country. If he did, there's no need for him to hide any longer, for he is now in no danger." She now dispatched messengers all through the city and the surrounding country, who cried aloud for Tiggle, saying that the new Boolooroo wanted him. Tiggle, hiding in the cellar of a deserted house in a back street, at last heard these cries and joyfully came forth to confront the messenger. Having heard of the old Booloroo's downfall and disgrace, the man consented to go to the palace again, and as soon as Trot saw him she asked about the umbrella. Tiggle thought hard for a minute and then said he remembered sweeping the king's rooms and finding a queer thing that might have been an umbrella lying beneath a cabinet. It had ropes and two wooden seats and a wicker basket all attached to the handle. "That's it!" cried Button Bright excitedly, and "That's it! That's it!" cried both Trot and Cap'n Bill. "But what did you do with it?" asked Ghip Ghisizzle. "I dragged it out and threw it on the rubbish heap in an alley back of the palace," said Tiggle. At once they all rushed out to the alley and began digging in the rubbish heap. By and by Cap'n Bill uncovered the lunch basket, and pulling on this he soon drew up the two seats and finally the Magic Umbrella. "Hooray!" shouted Button Bright, grabbing the umbrella and hugging it tight in his arms. "Hooray!" shrieked the parrot. "Cap'n Bill's a lucky fella 'cause he found the old umbrella." Trot's face was wreathed in smiles. "This is just the best luck that could have happened to us," she exclaimed, "'cause now we can go home whenever we please." "Let's go now, this minute, before we lose the umbrella again," said Button Bright. But Trot shook her head. "Not yet," she replied. "We've got to straighten out things in Sky Island first of all. A queen has some duties, you know, and as long as I'm queen here I've got to live up to the part." "What has to be did, mate?" inquired Cap'n Bill. "Well, we've fixed the Blue Country pretty well by makin' Sizzle the Boolooroo of it. But the Pinkies must be looked after, too, 'cause they've stood by us and helped us to win. We must take 'em home again, safe and sound, and get a new queen to rule over 'em. When that's done, we can go home any time we want to." "Quite right, Trot," said the sailor approvingly. "When do we march?" "Right away," she replied. "I've had enough of the Blue Country, haven't you?" "We have, mate." "We've had plenty of it," observed Button Bright. "And the Pinkies are anxious to get home," added Rosalie, who was present. So Cap'n Bill unhooked the seats from the handle of the umbrella and wound the ropes around the two boards and made a package of them, which he carried under his arm. Trot took the empty lunch basket and Button Bright held fast to the precious umbrella. Then they returned to the palace to bid good bye to Ghip Ghisizzle and the Blues. The new Boolooroo seemed rather sorry to lose his friends, but the people were secretly glad to get rid of the strangers, especially of the Pinkies. They maintained a sullen silence while Coralie and Captain Tintint formed their ranks in marching order, and they did not even cheer when Trot said to them in a final speech: "I'm the Queen of Sky Island, you know, and the new Boolooroo has got to carry out my orders and treat you all nicely while I'm away. I don't know when I'll come back, but you'd better watch out and not make any trouble, or I'll find a way to make you sorry for it. So now, good bye." "And good riddance!" screamed the six snub-nosed girls who had once been princesses and who were now in the crowd that watched the departure. But Trot paid no attention to them. She made a signal to the Pinky Band, which struck up a fine pink march, and then the army stepped out with the left foot first, and away went the conquerors down the streets of the Blue City, out of the blue barred gateway, and across the country toward the Fog Bank. End of chapter 27. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Sky Island by L. Frank Baum. Chapter 28. The Elephant's Head Comes to Life. When they reached the edge of the Fog Bank, the Pinkies all halted to put on their raincoats, and Button Bright put up his umbrella and held it over himself and Trot. Then, when everybody was ready, they entered the fog, and Rosalie the Witch made a signal to call the Frog King and his subjects to aid them, as they had done before. Pretty soon the great frogs appeared, a long line of them facing Trot and her pink army, and sitting upon their haunches close together. "Turn around so we can get upon your backs," said Rosalie. "Not yet," answered the Frog King in a gruff, deep voice. "You must first take that insulting umbrella out of my dominions." "Why, what is there about my umbrella that seems insulting?" asked Button Bright in surprise. "It is an insinuation that you don't like our glorious climate and object to our delightful fog, and are trying to ward off its soulful, clinging kisses," replied the Frog King in an agitated voice. "There has never been an umbrella in my kingdom before, and I'll not allow one in it now. Take it away at once." "But we can't," explained Trot. "We've got to take the umbrella with us to the Pink Country. We'll put it down, if you like, and cross the bank in this drizzle, which may be clingin' and soulful, but it is too wet to be comfortable. But the umbrella's got to go with us." "It can't go another inch," cried the obstinate frog with an angry croak. "Nor shall any of your people advance another step while that insulting umbrella is with you." Trot turned to Rosalie. "What shall we do?" she asked. "I really do not know," replied the witch, greatly perplexed. "Can't you make the frogs let us through?" inquired the boy. "No, I have no power over the frogs," Rosalie answered. "They carried us before as a favor, but if the king now insists that we cannot pass with the umbrella, we must go back to the Blue Country, or leave your umbrella behind us." "We won't do that," said Button Bright indignantly. "Can't we fight the frogs?" "Fight!" cried Trot. "Why, see how big they are! They could eat up our whole army if they wanted to." But just then, while they stood dismayed at this unfortunate position, a queer thing happened. The umbrella in Button Bright's hand began to tremble and shake. He looked down at the handle and saw that the red eyes of the carved elephant's head were rolling fiercely and sending out red sparks of anger in all directions. The trunk swayed from side to side, and the entire head began to swell and grow larger. In his fright, the boy sprang backward a step and dropped the umbrella to the ground, and as he did so it took the form of a complete elephant, growing rapidly to a monstrous size. Then, flapping its ears and wagging its tail, which was merely the covered frame of the umbrella, the huge elephant lifted its trunk and charged the line of astonished frogs. In a twinkling the frogs all turned and made the longest leaps their powerful legs enabled them to. The king jumped first of all, and in a panic of fear the others followed his example. They were out of sight in an instant, and then the elephant turned its head and looked at Button-Bright and at once trotted into the depths of the fog. "He wants us to follow," said the boy, gasping in amazement at this wonderful transformation. So immediately they began marching through the fog behind the elephant, and as the great beast advanced the frogs scrambled out of his way and hid themselves in the moist banks until he had passed them by. Cap'n Bill had to mind his wooden leg carefully, and the old sailor was so excited that he mumbled queer sentences about Arabian Nights and ding-donged magic and the foolishness of fussin' with witches and sich, until Trot wondered whether her old friend had gone crazy or was only badly scared. It was a long journey, and all the Pinkies were dripping water from their raincoats, and their little fat legs were tired and aching when the pink glow showing through the fog at last announced the fact that they were nearing the Pink Country. At the very edge of the fog bank the elephant halted, winked at Button-Bright, lowered its head, and began to shrink in size and dwindle away. By the time the boy came up to it, closely followed by Trot and Cap'n Bill, the thing was only the well-known magic umbrella, with the carved elephant's head for a handle, and it lay motionless upon the ground. Button-Bright cautiously picked it up, and as he examined it he thought the tiny red eyes still twinkled a little, as if with triumph and pride. Trot drew a long breath. "That was some magic, I guess," she exclaimed. "Don't you think so, Rosalie?" "It was the most wonderful thing I ever saw," admitted the witch. "The fairies who control Button-Bright's umbrella must be very powerful indeed." End of chapter 28. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Sky Island by L. Frank Baum. Chapter 29. Trot regulates the Pinkies. The Pinkies were rejoiced to find themselves again in their beloved land of sunrises and sunsets. They sang and shouted with glee, and the band uncovered its pink instruments and played the national pink anthem, while the parrot flew from Trot's shoulder to Cap'n Bill's shoulder and back again, screaming ecstatically, "Hooray! We're through the wetful fogs, where the elephant scared the fretful frogs." There was a magnificent sunset in the sky just then, and it cheered the Pinkies and gave them renewed strength. Away they hastened across the pink fields to the Pink City, where all the pink people who had been left behind ran out to welcome them home again. Trot and Button-Bright, with Cap'n Bill and Rosalie the Witch, went to the humble palace, where they had a simple supper of coarse food and slept upon hard beds. In the houses of the city, however, there was much feasting and merrymaking, and it seemed to Trot that the laws of the country which forbade the Queen from enjoying all the good things the people did were decidedly wrong and needed changing. The next morning Rosalie said to the little girl, "Will you make Tourmaline the Queen again when you go away?" "I'll send for her and see about it," replied Trot. But when Tourmaline arrived at the palace, dressed all in lovely fluffy robes and with a dainty pink plume in her pink hair, she begged most earnestly not to be made the Queen again. "I'm having a good time just now, after years of worry and uncomfortable living in this uncomfortable old hut of a palace," said the poor girl. "It would be cruel for you to make me the servant of the people again and condemn me to want and misery." "That seems reasonable," replied Trot thoughtfully. "Rosalie's skin is just as light a pink as my own," continued Tourmaline. "Why don't you make her the Queen?" "I hadn't thought of that," said Trot. Then she turned to Rosalie and asked, "How would you like to rule the Pinkies?" "I wouldn't like it," replied the witch with a smile. "The Queen is the poorest and most miserable creature in all the kingdom, and I'm sure I don't deserve such a fate. I've always tried to be a good witch and do my duty." Trot thought this over quite seriously for a time. Then one of her quaint ideas came to her, so quaint that it was entirely sensible. "I'm the Queen of the Pinkies just now, am I not?" she asked. "Of course," answered Rosalie. "None can dispute that." "Then I've the right to make new laws, haven't I?" "I believe so." "In that case," said the girl, "I'm goin' to make a law that the Queen shall have the same food and the same dresses and the same good times that her people have, and she shall live in a house just as good as the houses of any of her people, and have as much money to spend as anybody, but no more. The Queen can have her share of everything, 'cordin' to the new law, but if she tries to get more than her share, I'll have the law say she shall be taken to the edge and pushed off. What do you think of that law, Rosalie?" "It's a good law, and a just one," replied the witch, approvingly. So Trot sent for the Royal Scribbler, who was a very fat Pinky with large pink eyes and curly pink hair, and had him carefully write the new law in the Great Book of Laws. The Royal Scribbler wrote it very nicely in pink ink, with a big capital letter at the beginning and a fine flourish at the end. After Trot had signed her name to it as Queen, she called all of the important people of the land to assemble in the Court of the Statues and ordered the Royal Declaimer to read to them the new law. The Pinkies seemed to think it was a just law and much better than the old one, and Rosalie said: "Now, no one can object to becoming the Queen, since the ruler of the Pinkies will no longer be obliged to endure suffering and hardships." "All right," said Trot. "In that case I'll make you the Queen, Rosalie, for you've got more sense than Tourmaline has, and your powers as a witch will help you to protect the people." At once she made the announcement, telling the assembled Pinkies that by virtue of her high office as Queen of Sky Island she would leave Rosalie the Witch to rule over the Pink Country while she returned to the earth with her friends. As Rosalie was greatly loved and respected, the people joyfully accepted her as their queen, and Trot ordered them to tear down the old hut and build a new palace for Rosalie, one which would be just as good as any other house in the city, but no better. She further ordered a pink statue of Tourmaline to be set up in the court, and also a pink statue of herself, so that the record of all the rulers of the Pinkies should be complete. The people agreed to do all this as soon as possible, and some of the leaders whispered together and then asked Coralie to be their spokesman in replying to Queen Trot's speech. Coralie stood on a chair and made a bow, after which she thanked Trot in the name of the Pinkies for leading them safely into the Blue Country and out again, and for giving them so good a queen as Rosalie. The Pinkies would be sorry to have their new friends, the Earth people, leave them, but asked the Queen of Sky Island to carry with her the royal band of pink gold, which she now wore upon her brow, together with the glistening pink jewel set in its center. It would remind her, Coralie declared, of the beautiful land of sunset and sunrise, and of the fact that the Pinkies would always be glad to welcome her back. Trot knew she would never return to Sky Island, but she did not tell them that. She merely thanked Coralie and the Pinkies, and said they might all come to the court after dinner and see her and her comrades fly away through the sky. End of chapter 29. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Sky Island by L. Frank Baum. Chapter 30. The Journey Home. After the Pinkies had been dismissed, their new queen, Rosalie, by means of a clever charm, conjured up a dinner table set with very nice things to eat. They all enjoyed a hearty meal, and afterward sat and talked over their adventures. "Will you take the parrot home with you, Trot?" asked Cap'n Bill. "Guess not, Cap'n," she answered. "Mother wouldn't like to have him hangin' round and screechin' bad poetry every minute. I'll give him to Rosalie, for I'm sure she'll take good care of him." Rosalie accepted the gift with pleasure, but the parrot looked sober a while and then said: "This looks to me like a give-away, but here I am and here I'll stay. The country's pink, but we'll all be blue when Trot goes home, as she says she'll do." They now packed the lunch basket with the remains of the feast, for they knew a long journey was before them and feared they might be hungry before they landed again. Cap'n Bill straightened out the ropes and adjusted the seats, while Button Bright examined the umbrella to see if it had been injured in any way when the elephant tramped through the fog bank. The boy looked into the small red eyes of the carved elephant's head handle with some misgivings, but as seen in the strong sunshine, the eyes were merely red stones, while the handle plainly showed the marks of the tool that had carved it. When all was ready, they went into the Court of the Statues, where all the Pinkies were assembled, together with their pink band, and Cap'n Bill hooked the swinging seats onto the handle of the Magic Umbrella. Trot kissed Rosalie and Coralie and Tourmaline goodbye and said to them, "If you ever happen to come to Earth, you must be sure to visit me, and I'll try to give you a good time. But perhaps you'll stay here all your lives." "I think we shall," replied Rosalie, laughing, "for in all Sky Island there will be no Magic Umbrella for us to fly with." "And when you see Polychrome," added Trot, "just give her my love." Then she and Button Bright seated themselves in the double seat, which was flat upon the pink ground, and Cap'n Bill sat before them on his own seat, to which the lunch basket had been fastened by means of a stout cord. "Hold fast," said the sailorman, and they all held fast to the ropes, while the boy, glancing up toward the open umbrella he held, said solemnly and distinctly, "Take us to Trot's house on the earth." The umbrella obeyed, at once mounting into the air. It moved slowly at first, but gradually increased its speed. First it lifted the seat of the boy and girl, then Cap'n Bill's seat, and finally the lunch basket. "Fly high, mind your eye, don't cry, bye bye!" shouted the parrot from the Pink Witch's shoulder. Trot leaned over and waved her hand. The pink band played as loud as it could, in order that the travelers might hear it as long as possible, and Rosalie and Coralie and Tourmaline threw kisses to their vanishing friends as long as they remained in sight. "Seems good to be on the way home again," remarked Trot as the umbrella bumped into a big black cloud. "It really does, mate," answered the sailorman joyously. Fast through the cloud the umbrella swept, and then suddenly it sailed into a clear blue sky, across which a great and gorgeous rainbow spread its radiant arch. Upon the bow danced the dainty daughters of the rainbow, and the umbrella passed near enough to it for the passengers to observe Polychrome merrily leading her sisters, her fleecy robes waving prettily in the gentle breeze. "Goodbye, Polly!" cried Button Bright, and Trot and Cap'n Bill both called out, "Goodbye!" Polychrome heard and nodded to them smilingly, never halting in her graceful dance. Then the umbrella dropped far below the arch, which presently faded from view. It was an exciting ride. Scenes presented themselves entirely different from those they had seen on their former voyage, for the sky changes continually, and the clouds of the moment are not the clouds of an hour ago. Once they passed between two small stars as brilliant as diamonds, and once an enormous bird, whose wings spread so wide that they shadowed the sun, soared directly over them and lost itself in the vague distance of the limitless sky. They rode quite comfortably, however, and were full of eager interest in what they saw. The rush of air past them made them hungry, so Cap'n Bill drew up the lunch basket and held it so that Button Bright and Trot could help themselves to the pink food, which tasted very good. And finally a dark rim appeared below them, which the sailor declared must be the earth. He proved to be correct, and when they came nearer they found themselves flying over the waves of the ocean. Pretty soon a small island appeared, and Trot exclaimed, "That's the Sky Island we thought we were goin' to, only we didn't." "Yes, and there's the mainland, mate," cried Cap'n Bill excitedly, pointing toward a distant coast. On swept the Magic Umbrella. Then its speed gradually slackened. The houses and trees on the coast could be seen, and presently, almost before they realized it, they were set down gently upon the high bluff near the giant acacia. A little way off stood the white cottage where Trot lived. It was growing dusk as Cap'n Bill unhooked the seats and Button Bright folded up the umbrella and tucked it under his arm. Trot seized the lunch basket and ran to the house, where she found her mother busy in the kitchen. "Well, I'm back again," said the little girl. Is supper ready, Mama?" Button-Bright stayed all night with them, but next morning, bright and early, he hooked one of the seats to his Magic Umbrella and said good bye to Trot and Cap'n Bill, and flew into the air to begin his journey to Philadelphia. Just before he started, Trot said: "Let me know if you get home safe, Button-Bright, and come and see me again as quick as you can." "I'll try to come again," said the boy. "We've had a good time, haven't we, Trot?" "The best time I ever had," she replied enthusiastically. Then she asked: "Didn't you like it, too, Cap'n Bill?" "Parts of it, mate," the sailor answered, as he thoughtfully made marks in the sand with the end of his wooden leg. "But seems to me the best part of all was gettin' home again." After several days Trot received a postal card from Button-Bright. It was awkwardly scrawled, for the boy was not much of a writer, but Trot managed to make out the words. It read as follows: "Got home safe, Trot, and the folks were so worried they forgot to scold me. Father has taken the Magic Umbrella and locked it up in a big, strong chest in the attic. He put the key in his own pocket, so I don't know as I'll ever be able to see you again. But I'll never forget the Queen of Sky Island, and I send my love to you and Cap'n Bill. Your friend, Button-Bright." The End. End of Chapter 30. End of Sky Island. Recorded by Judy Beber, May and June 2006.